A convoy of armored SUVs races toward Ciudad Juarez, a strategic border city serving as a gateway to the United States, a critical hub for coke trafficking. 30 minutes from their destination, they pass through Samalayuca, a small town nestled in the heart of a desert landscape with majestic dunes. The convoy slows as it approaches a roadblock. Among the officers present stands a young policeman in his 20s, Sergio, the future El Grande, a colossus standing over 6.5 feet tall and weighing at least 240 pounds. His imposing stature and intimidating personality already hint at a formidable potential that he himself doesn't yet recognize. He already senses this is no routine check. Years later, in a U.S. courtroom, El Grande will testify about this decisive encounter that would forever change the course of his life.
I was responsible for the shift, and this was in Sinaloa, Chihuahua.
What kind of things was the checkpoint set up for?
It was a setup to detect drugs, weapon, people without identity papers. And at the time, there were a few of those.
Did anything significant happen shortly after you began your work there?
Yes.
What happened?
Some SUVs pulled up to the checkpoint on day, and people who were wearing uniforms just like ours and who were armed got out. It was Amado Carrillo.
Who was Amado Carrillo?
The leader of the Juarez Cartel.
What is that?
It was a cartel, which at the time, during those years, was the most powerful organization in Mexico.
Amado's operations reached such an impressive level that they eclipsed, according to reports, those of the Colombian cartels. At its peak, the Juarez organization, under his leadership, controlled at least half of the Mexican drug trafficking to the United States. Amado was unquestionably the number one of that era.
And just to be clear, the people who were wearing federal judicial police uniforms with Amado, did they work for the federal judicial police?
No.
Who did they work for?
For the Juarez Cartel.
So what happened when they came to your checkpoint?
They pointed their guns at us, and then Amado Carrillo introduced himself to us and said, "Well, you either ally yourself with us or you get out of here."
And what did you say?
We all said yes.
And what happened next?
Faced with guns pointed at them and their meager salaries, they had no choice but to accept.
We started working with the Juarez organization. I did so in a more direct way.
El Grande would quickly climb the ranks of the hierarchy. A decade later, he would deliver briefcases filled with millions of dollars intended to finance presidential campaigns. But let's return to 1993, a pivotal year when everything shifted in the underworld. At that time, Mexican territory was primarily divided among four major cartels: Tijuana, Juarez, Sinaloa, and Gulf. Although their names evoke specific geographic areas, each operated in several Mexican states, constantly shifting areas of influence. Historically, these three organizations, Tijuana, Sinaloa, and Juarez, were part of a single entity and worked closely together. However, an internal war eventually broke out, reaching its peak in May 1993 with the execution of a cardinal at the Guadalajara airport. The country then launched a pursuit of those responsible, specifically targeting the Sinaloa and Tijuana teams. El Chapo from Sinaloa was the first to fall, landing behind bars. The Arellano Felix brothers, who led the Tijuana group, escaped arrest by paying a $10 million bribe to a high-ranking Mexican police official. They also sacrificed a few insignificant members of their organization to provide false testimony. This gave them time. The houses were raided, but everything was arranged in advance to facilitate their escape. They then lay low by dispersing across the country. Meanwhile, their sworn enemy El Chapo was already in prison, out of reach, but his associates were now on a hit list of targets to eliminate. The Sinaloa organization brings together several leaders, each running their own team while sharing their resources to maximize their collective power. Members include El Mayo, El Chapo, recently incarcerated, and his friend Hector Palma. El Azul, who has just regained his freedom, also joins their ranks, as does Ignacio, alias Nacho, who would later become famous as the King of Crystal. We'll come back to that later. During El Chapo's incarceration, his operations are managed by his brother El Pollo and his distant cousins from the Beltran Leyva family, under the leadership of El Barbas. Meanwhile, the Juarez group led by Amado consolidated its dominant position. He had gathered his brothers around him and coordinated the activities of the main members of the Sinaloa Cartel. According to several reports, important figures like El Mayo, El Azul, and El Barbas were so closely linked to Juarez operations that they were considered an integral part of the organization. This strategic alliance made sense. Amado was the big winner of this period, and associating with him guaranteed a privileged place in this flourishing trade. Everyone was able to use the same routes to the United States, minimizing risks thanks to the sophisticated network established by Amado. Testimonies reveal El Mayo's clever strategy, who excelled at staying in the shadows of the more high-profile narcos. He benefited from their notoriety while discreetly generating significant amounts of money and preserving his autonomy. His collaboration with Amado consisted primarily of overseeing the logistics of shipments in the Pacific region of Mexico, particularly in Sinaloa. Like El Azul, El Mayo benefited from Amado's reputation while deliberately remaining in the background. The less they were talked about in the newspapers, the less they risked being arrested or eliminated. This strategy allowed them to survive much longer than others in this dangerous world. El Azul distinguished himself from other barons through his role as a strategic advisor, drawing on his decades of experience. Respected as an elder of the underworld, he maintained cordial relationships with all major players. This diplomacy allowed him to achieve his objectives without taking unnecessary risks.
He's an excellent negotiator, perhaps the best strategist the Mexican underworld has ever known, and the only one who managed to bring rival traffickers to the same negotiating table. He knows better than most the importance of staying in the background, because experience has taught him that surfacing, even for a moment, can mean death or prison.
Amado particularly appreciates El Azul's talent as a mediator when he succeeds in bringing together the leaders of the Juarez and Gulf cartels around the same table, two organizations in conflict for a long time. Let's examine this situation more closely. The Gulf organization is a true institution of the Mexican underworld. This group has existed for generations. When Colombian powder became popular, its new leader, Juan Garcia Abrego, immediately seized the opportunity by investing heavily in it. Their historic headquarters is located right at the border, with several strategic cross-border passages, much closer to the northeastern American market than the Tijuana or Juarez routes. Beyond their presence in this Texas border state, they also control the routes and ports all along the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf Group became an essential partner for Colombian barons seeking new routes. In the 90s, it generated estimated annual profits of several $1 billion. It is said that Amado drew inspiration from his Gulf neighbors and their leader Juan to demand better control over coke distribution and negotiate more advantageous deals with the Colombians. The Mexicans no longer wanted to play the role of mere intermediaries. They were beginning to build their own distribution networks in the United States. The white powder generated so much money that it allowed them to buy the loyalty of police officers and politicians, fueling a vicious cycle. More drugs, more money, more protection, and even more drugs. In 1993, El Azul demonstrates his talent as a mediator by organizing a crucial meeting between the leaders of Juarez and the Gulf. The objective? to negotiate an agreement to ease tensions in the north of the country. This mediation results in the Peace of the North, a pact that puts an end to violence between the two organizations, at least temporarily. However, bringing the Arellano Felix brothers from Tijuana to the same table proved more difficult. After several unsuccessful attempts to find common ground with the Sinaloa men, they had crossed the point of no return. They even went so far as to put a $3 million contract on El Mayo's head, he who was once their longtime partner in Tijuana. Despite these risks, the drug lords fully enjoyed their lives. The closeness between Amado and the Sinaloa men showed itself during numerous parties and luxurious villas, where the entertainment matched their fortunes. They had every reason to celebrate the colossal profits from their businesses. Amado and El Mayo were frequently seen together at meetings or traveling, underscoring their particularly close relationship. This clear alliance between the two men certainly did not escape the attention of the Tijuana brothers. Amado was spending millions on monthly bribes, which guaranteed him total freedom. His informants, infiltrated everywhere, transmitted to him in real time even the smallest details of police and military operations. Drug seizures were merely staged performances orchestrated to satisfy public opinion. His empire functioned like a well-oiled machine. Expensive, certainly, but infinitely profitable. He moved freely around Mexico City, where he owned several luxurious properties. His visits to the Ochoa Bali High restaurant were almost ritualistic. It was there that he liked to enjoy generous seafood platters in the company of his close friends. His network of informants was so effective that even the slightest danger immediately triggered an alert. Yet, despite these precautions, he had never imagined that anyone would dare to attack him in the heart of the capital itself. At the end of 1993, while Amado was enjoying the evening with his wife and friends, several hitmen from Tijuana, supposedly sent by the CAF, another name for the Arellano Felix brothers cartel, entered the restaurant. They knew Amado's habits from their past collaboration when they were all part of a single cartel. They hadn't forgotten his fascination with this restaurant and his taste for seafood. Their mission became complicated. Amado's appearance had changed since the photos they had. He had abandoned his hippie beard for a well-groomed look. Sitting near the restrooms, Amado savors his favorite seafood platters. The hitmen open fire and eliminate several bodyguards. Amado manages to escape thanks to the quick intervention of his key lieutenant. What worries Amado most is suddenly moving from relative anonymity into the spotlight of the authorities, and especially the American government. Meanwhile, another attempt against Amado proves almost impossible. The Tijuana brothers therefore focus their efforts on hunting down El Mayo and his family. Let's recall a few key points. El Mayo had lived in Tijuana for several years before the conflict between the two organizations erupted. This rivalry forced him to move his family to Culiacan, Sinaloa, where he could better ensure their protection. The tension stemmed from the Arellano Felix brothers' decision to impose a tax on all drugs transiting through their border territory with the United States, a demand that the Sinaloa guys did not respect. They also demanded that El Mayo settle a debt of $20 million. El Mayo, who had been using this corridor for years, categorically refused to submit to these new conditions. For El Mayo, nothing was more precious than his son Vicentillo. At only 18 years old, the young man had taken refuge in Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa, hoping to lead an ordinary life there. But his father had other plans: to prepare him to become the heir to his notorious empire. The Arellano Felix brothers knew this perfectly well and considered Vicentillo to be El Mayo's weak point.
A few months later, my mother, my sisters, and I moved back to Culiacan, Sinaloa. I continued my high school studies while living at my older sister Maria Teresa's house with my brother-in-law Javier Diaz. One evening, someone knocked at the door. I already had a pistol tucked in my waistband. By then, my father and the Arellano Felix family had become enemies, and a bloody war was raging. When I opened the door, I was struck in the face. 2 men were trying to force their way inside. I stumbled backward.
Reacting quickly, he blocks the door and pushes back the assailants. Despite several gunshots fired through the door, Vicentillo survives this assassination attempt. These men had undoubtedly been sent by the Tijuana group. Faced with this threat, El Mayo makes a radical decision to send his son to the other end of the country, to Cancun in the state of Quintana Roo. This choice is strategic. Cancun was the ideal entry point for Colombian shipments arriving by sea. This lively tourist destination also offered an advantage: the ability to easily blend into the crowd, far from the territory controlled by the Arellano Felix. Vicentillo arrives in Cancun accompanied by his sister and his brother-in-law Javier. The latter's presence is crucial in the family organization. El Mayo, known for his small circle of confidants, counted Baltazar Diaz, alias Don Balta, among his closest allies. This alliance was consolidated in the traditional way in the underworld, through a marriage between their children. El Mayo's daughter thus married Javier, creating an indissoluble bond between the two families. Don Balta, originally from Sinaloa, had built a considerable financial empire that earned him a leading status in the underworld. Even temporarily incarcerated, his business continued normally. It was his son Javier who took care of it in close collaboration with El Mayo.
In 1994, I was living between Culiacan and Cancun in Quintana Roo. At that time, I stayed with my brother-in-law Javier Diaz, whom my father had put in charge of managing the Cancun Plaza. He handled coke shipments from my father along the Atlantic coast, receiving them directly from Colombia. Javier reported both to my father and to my compadre Amado Carrillo Fuentes, since they were working together at the time. While living with Javier, I witnessed numerous meetings between cartel employees and their suppliers. Through those experiences, I became deeply familiar with how the organization operated in Cancun.
Under Javier's tutelage, responsible for local logistics, Vicentillo learned the ins and outs of the trade. In 1994, a strategic meeting was held at a ranch near Juarez, bringing together El Mayo, Amado, and their Colombian partners. The objective? To optimize the transportation of white powder via the Quintana Roo coast. Their plan involved using go-fast boats from Colombia to the area around Cancun. Once received, the merchandise would be transported to New York to be delivered to Colombian distributors. On several occasions, Vicentillo accompanied Javier to unload the shipments, inventory the packages, and assess the quality of the product. Vicentillo was learning the trade alongside his father, attending strategic meetings to understand how the organization operated.
Was there a specific reason your father wanted you to get involved in his business?
Yes, because I was the eldest son.
However, Vicentillo was not the only target of the Tijuana group. Rey, El Mayo's brother, responsible for the group's logistics and accounting in the Mexican capital, also survived a liquidation attempt orchestrated by the Arellano brothers. One afternoon, while Rey was quietly shopping in a luxury boutique in Mexico City, a group of sicarios ambushed him. In broad daylight, they opened fire from a distance. A bullet struck him in the head and knocked him down. Despite the severity of the situation, Rey maintained remarkable composure. He got back up, drew his weapon, and returned fire, forcing the assailants to retreat. The bullet left a permanent mark in his skull, but miraculously did not penetrate his brain, saving his life. After this incident, Rey immediately packed his bags and joined Vicentillo and Javier in Cancun, consolidating their operations. In Cancun, Rey oversees the fleet of go-fast boats equipped with overpowered engines. These vessels cover the distance between Colombia and Mexico in less than 48 hours. The paradisiacal beaches of Quintana Roo, popular with tourists, become strategic entry points for Amado and El Mayo's empire. Upon arrival, the shipments are unloaded and transported to secure warehouses. Corrupt officers monitor the operation, ensuring the absence of surprise inspections. The merchandise is then concealed in gas tanker trucks, all in compliance with administrative regulations. The system is ingenious. A secret compartment is built into each vehicle to hide the Colombian powder. The tank is then filled with real gas. During a roadside inspection, opening the valves releases authentic gas, making the deception undetectable. These convoys cross the country to the border states where the merchandise is distributed to the American market. Rey oversees the entire operation with surgical precision, maintaining meticulous records and constantly optimizing logistics. However, the real boss, El Mayo, not only watches over his family's safety, but must also ensure his own. This time, the Tijuana brothers will go so far that it will initially be mistaken for a large-scale attack.
Aparentemente fue la explosión de una bomba en cercano a una fiesta de 15 años que se celebraba en el Hotel Camino Real.
June 1994, Guadalajara. This city, cradle of Mexican culture, also houses the highest echelons of organized crime. One of Sinaloa's prominent figures organizes a quinceañera, this traditional celebration marking the passage to adulthood for his 15-year-old daughter. The reception takes place in splendor within the luxurious halls of the Camino Real Hotel. Renowned musical groups animate the evening. Approximately 300 carefully selected guests converge from the four corners of Mexico: influential politicians, respected narcos, and high-ranking police officers. One particular guest is presumed to be on the list: El Mayo. As a close associate of the organizer, his presence as guest of honor is the subject of persistent rumors. This crucial information reaches the ears of the Arellano Felix brothers well before the celebration. Without wasting time, they mobilize their henchmen to orchestrate the attack. Two sicarios arrive at the hotel's outskirts in a car carrying a particularly sinister gift. The vehicle is packed with explosives. But nothing goes as planned. Late in the night, a massive explosion shakes the Camino Real Hotel. The walls, floor, and ceiling tremble violently, plunging all the guests into confusion. Contrary to the initial plan, to abandon the car bomb in the parking lot, the operation turns into a fiasco. The nervousness of the inexperienced sicarios causes a premature detonation, likely triggered by accidental activation of the remote control. The explosion is so powerful that the two assailants are completely obliterated. Fragments of their bodies are discovered across a radius of several hundred yards, scattered like pieces of a gruesome puzzle no one could ever put back together.
Se hablaba de que habían encontrado restos de masa encefálica y restos de vísceras esparcidos en varias partes, tanto en la acera de enfrente del Hotel Camino Real como pues a tan solo unos metros precisamente de la entrada o el acceso de este lujoso hotel.
This botched operation also claims the lives of several innocent civilians unfortunate enough to be nearby. According to investigators, if the operation had gone according to plan, the number of victims could have exceeded 200. In any case, El Mayo escapes unscathed and fully understands that the Tijuana men are not joking. But beyond the rivalries, another hard blow strikes the Sinaloa group. Hector Palma, close friend of El Chapo, falls into the hands of the authorities. His luck runs out in 1995 when, by pure coincidence, his business jet crashes. Although he survives without injury, the numerous arrest warrants against him make any negotiation with the police or military impossible. He is finally imprisoned in the high-security Puente Grande prison near Guadalajara. But he is not alone. Let's recall that El Chapo, arrested in 1993, had been sent to Altiplano, the most secure prison in the country. After almost 3 years of strict discipline and restrictions, he obtains a transfer to Puente Grande, where he reunites with Hector. It is there that El Chapo, through corruption and intimidation, transforms the prison into a true 5-star hotel. He lives as if the establishment belongs to him, which allows him to easily continue his business thanks to contacts maintained with his brother El Pollo. Mexico City, one of the most populous metropolises in the world, has established itself as a nerve center of drug trafficking. It is here that countless shipments are packaged before being transported to the U.S. market. But the strategic position of the capital goes far beyond logistics. It offers a paradoxical haven of tranquility, where even today many families of high-ranking narcos lead a luxurious existence in privileged neighborhoods. These secure residences allow them to live in anonymity, far from the watchful eye of the authorities. It is common for important figures of the underworld to stay there peacefully, even as they orchestrate bloody conflicts in other regions of the country. In other words, behind ordinary facades hide millionaire narcos without anyone suspecting it. The only clue to this concealed wealth? Armored cars surrounded by armed guards, an image that has become commonplace in Mexico, where wealthy families live in constant fear of kidnapping. Often a sanctuary zone for many kingpins, the capital serves as the operational base of Don Balta, an emblematic figure of the Sinaloa Cartel. Freshly released from prison, he continues his business in the metropolis. But not for long. His fate is sealed at the beginning of 1995 when he is eliminated on the outskirts of Mexico City. A few months later, in Bosques de las Lomas, the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, originally built to meet the needs of Mexican high society and wealthy European immigrants, Amado and El Mayo discreetly meet in an apartment. There, they meet with a police commander to negotiate the acquisition of sophisticated surveillance equipment. Their objective? To spy on the Arellano Felix brothers, whose advances into their territory are increasingly concerning. This meeting takes on its full significance when one knows that in 1996, shortly after, Javier, Don Balta's son, would meet the same fate as his father. He is eliminated in this same city, in a restaurant parking lot, presumably on orders from the Arellano Felix. In Cancun, Vicentillo receives a crucial call from his father, El Mayo, who entrusts him with the responsibility of an important shipment of Colombian powder expected on the coast in the coming hours. The time has come for Vicentillo to put into practice the teachings of Javier, his respected mentor, by demonstrating the composure necessary to orchestrate this delicate operation.
During that time, I observed how Javier operated and how my father's men handled the shipments. Later, I gave the order to my brother-in-law's crew and to my father's men to receive the next load, just as they had done under Javier's supervision. That marked my first direct involvement in drug trafficking, about 1,600 kilos of white powder.
After successfully receiving the shipment, he returns to Culiacan in the state of Sinaloa to rejoin his father.
What did you do after coordinating the shipments in Cancun?
My father asked me to go to Culiacan because the war against the Arellano Felix had begun. He explained to me that the Arellano Felix had promised to eliminate other members of our family, including me.
From this moment on, Vicentillo becomes an important lieutenant of the organization. Over the years, his role expands considerably. The young man claims he never wanted this life, but fate decided otherwise. Having grown up in this world, he knew no other way of life.
At that time, the war with the Arellano Felix brothers was ongoing, They were executing many people, family members and employees of my father in Culiacan. He asked me to stay with him, to stay very close, because I was one of their targets. They wanted to get rid of me to hurt my father. Since I was constantly by his side, I began to see everything he did and to discuss with him his work in smuggling. I attended meetings with my compadre Amado and Colombians who were negotiating deals, as well as meetings with corrupt police officers. That's how I started with him. I understood how everything worked, and little by little I got involved in my father's business. The reason I was so attached to him was the danger, because I was his son, his eldest son.
Operations in Cancun prospered for many years, but they represented just one facet of Amado's empire. It was his sophisticated aerial network that earned him the nickname Lord of the Skies. While his competitors relied on small planes to transport their merchandise, Amado changed the game with a fleet of Boeing 727s. Remember his presence during a roadside checkpoint near Juarez? That was no coincidence. To maintain his empire, Amado needed trusted men, especially corrupt police officers. It was precisely in the state of Chihuahua, where El Grande worked, that the numerous clandestine landing strips used by his planes were located. In this strategic zone, having officers in his pocket was essential to ensure the smooth operation of his business.
When you started working for the Juarez Cartel, did you continue your work with the Federal Judicial Police?
Yes.
Were you paid by the Juarez organization?
Yes.
And can you describe for us what things you did for the Juarez organization?
I would help receive planes that were loaded with coke, refuel them so they could take off again. And I would go around with the person responsible for the Juarez Cartel at the time, just to go around the city with them. And that was during my free time after I left the checkpoint.
By 1974, they're moving 20, 30, 40 kilos a week, these groups out of Medellin. By the late 70s, they're moving hundreds of kilos a week. By the early 80s, they're moving tons. By the 90s, they're moving plane loads, 727s going into Mexico with 5, 6, 7 tons of cocaine. So the organizations went through a progression, and they did it all by remote control. By the time the 90s come around, these people have perfected that business.
Amado's system operated with ruthless simplicity and flawless organization. The Boeings landed in the southern part of Chihuahua State after their long journey from Colombia. The merchandise was then transported overland to Juarez. Large shipments then crossed the international bridges into Texas via El Paso. Amado personally handled only the major loads. He delegated the rest to his lieutenants and brothers. In the mid-1990s, his operations experienced meteoric growth. This rise was helped along by the troubles of his main competitor, Juan Garcia Abrego, leader of the Gulf Cartel. In 1995, Juan became the first international drug lord to appear on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. American authorities had been tracking Juan for a long time and had finally zeroed in on his empire. His addition to the FBI list put considerable pressure on the Mexican government, forcing it to step up efforts to capture Juan and dismantle his network. Meanwhile, the Colombian cartels of Medellin and Cali gradually lost influence, transferring more power to their Mexican partners. Amado was at the forefront. He had developed privileged relationships with the Colombians who, according to a detective, particularly appreciated his way of operating. They like it when business is handled discreetly. This discretion was Amado's greatest asset. Unlike his neighbor from the Gulf, few journalists ventured to write about him, keeping him well out of the media spotlight. While the Gulf leader was hiding in northern Mexico, Amado seized the opportunity to consolidate his dominant position. According to investigator reports from the time, the Juarez group was quietly beginning to take over the coke distribution routes through Texas, territories traditionally controlled by the Gulf Organization.
Amado Carrillo is committed to large-scale operations with tremendous protection, even more than Juan Garcia Abrejo could get. His operations cannot be done without the direct complicity of the highest levels of protection from politicians and from the police and counter-narcotics agencies. He's a top-level trafficker. The facts have shown us that he's the boss. Amado Carrillo is most likely the #1 boss of the Mexican Federation of Cartels right now.
In 1996, the leader of the Gulf Organization was arrested by Mexican authorities and urgently expulsed to the United States to avoid legal and political obstacles. Amado became the undisputed king of white gold. At that time, according to DEA agents specializing in the Mexican underworld, Amado Carrillo Fuentes was the most influential and powerful narco Mexico had ever known.
No one will ever be able to know with complete certainty how much drugs the Juarez Cartel handled thanks to Amado's cunning and intelligence. What we do know is he was the one who transformed drug trafficking, which was a simple criminal activity, into a highly sophisticated illegal industry. Amado was always 10 steps ahead of the DEA and the Mexican government. He did it so well that he even had a style. Let's say, elegant. He never boasted about anything. He was very discreet, and his organization didn't eliminate innocent people unless it was absolutely necessary. He preferred to stay under the radar, knowing that targeting civilians or police officers would bring unwanted scrutiny from the authorities.
According to legend, Amado enjoyed tacit immunity in Juarez thanks to an agreement with local authorities. According to testimony from a former cartel member, a high-ranking police official allegedly contacted Amado directly to propose a pact. In exchange for non-interference in his narco business, Amado had to solve a major problem that was paralyzing the city. At that time, Ciudad Juarez was overrun with car theft gangs that terrorized the population. Law enforcement seemed powerless against them. In a single-night operation, Amado's men cleaned up the city by kidnapping roughly 150 thieves, who were then executed and buried in various locations. This intervention perfectly illustrates Amado's philosophy. Rather than confronting authorities, he preferred to establish pragmatic relationships. These arrangements benefited Amado while allowing authorities to solve certain problems. But it was above all his logistics that impressed the Americans pursuing him. One day, American radars detected a Boeing carrying, according to subsequent analysis, 12 tons of coke from Colombia. To put this load in perspective, sold wholesale at the Texas border, this quantity would have generated roughly $250 million. Under constant aerial surveillance, American and Mexican forces coordinated their pursuit. Agents closely followed the aircraft's trajectory as it flew inexorably toward northern Mexico, where numerous clandestine airstrips were located. In the cockpits of the surveillance planes, tension was at its peak. The pilots were determined never to lose sight of their target, no matter what it took.
The pilots who worked with the Juarez organization were very good. They charged Amado a lot of money, but they were undoubtedly worth what they asked for.
Amado's pilots, true virtuosos of the sky, maneuver the plane with surgical precision. They gradually descend and reduce speed before landing on a clandestine airstrip tucked into the mountains of Chihuahua State, territory controlled by the Juarez Group. On the ground, an impressive security force awaits them, more than 70 heavily armed men ready to protect the precious cargo. Once the Boeing lands, a clever plan is set into motion. In just a few minutes, Amado's men placed dozens of railroad tracks across the runway to prevent any other aircraft from landing. Amado was a genius. He always reserved this kind of surprise for the authorities. The location of this airstrip is no accident. Nestled in an isolated corner of the mountains, it is practically inaccessible by land. Even if armed forces reached it, their chances of escaping unscathed would be virtually zero against the security setup in place. Then, in a daring maneuver, the team is ordered to load $40 million in cash, a sum destined for Colombian suppliers. The entire operation, landing, refueling, unloading the powder, loading the money, and taking off again, is completed in less than 15 minutes. Every second, every movement is calculated with precision, leaving no chance for authorities to intervene. However, the growing scale of his operations increasingly draws the attention of law enforcement. Amado, aware of the risks his position carries, senses he must plan his exit from the underworld before meeting the inevitable fate of his peers: prison or death. Under Amado's leadership, the Juarez organization and its Sinaloa partners experienced rapid growth. However, Amado watched with concern the remarkable efficiency with which the American DEA and FBI had neutralized his Gulf competitor. He knew his turn would come. It was only a matter of time. He wanted to gradually step back from leading his organization. Negotiations were reportedly conducted with high-ranking Mexican officials to ensure continuity of operations while he discreetly withdrew. His aim was to form a cartel federation to reduce violence in the country. Everyone would benefit, as commissions would be paid to people in powerful positions. Amado deployed a network of emissaries worldwide to identify potential safe havens. These operatives, top-level financial and legal experts, conducted thorough investigations in several South American countries, including Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. These specialized teams evaluated investment opportunities, banking systems favorable to money laundering, and strategic locations for a new headquarters. The financial director of the Juarez Group prepared his boss's setup in Chile, a geographically isolated country, far from Mexico and with no significant history of cartel activity. His entourage made multiple trips to assess this future base of operations. His close family traveled there under false identities and gradually established a strong presence. The ultimate goal? To manage his billion-dollar empire remotely, far from the radar of Mexican and American authorities.
The objective was to study the possibility of establishing his organization outside Mexico. This organization was professional to the maximum. We found documentation that they had operatives who researched and examined the whole gamut of the economy and investment opportunities. Chile seemed like a good nation to them because of a solid, growing free market economy.
Despite his numerous trips abroad, Amado attends his sister's wedding in January 1997 at a family ranch in Sinaloa. In videos from that time, he can be seen fully enjoying the festivities, displaying a disconcerting calm for such a wanted man. Mexican military authorities are alerted to his presence and prepare an intervention. However, El Mayo, the powerful Sinaloa boss, receives an urgent call from an army major, warning him of the soldier's imminent arrival. Mayo immediately passes the information to Amado, who discreetly disappears a few minutes before the armed forces arrive. This ability to anticipate authorities' operations reveals just how deeply the cartels had infiltrated Mexican institutions. This intelligence had cost Mayo several $100,000, but it was a good investment. It allowed them to remain free and strengthen their alliance. After all, Amado's success benefited all his partners. His reputation as the undisputed godfather resonated all the way to Tijuana, where the Arellano Felix brothers acknowledged their strategic inferiority. A new attempt at reconciliation between Juarez and Tijuana is initiated, an alliance that, had it materialized, would have constituted the most notorious coalition in Mexico. However, Amado harbors a persistent grudge over the liquidation attempt he survived at his favorite seafood restaurant in Mexico City. His condition for any negotiation is clear. The Arellano Felix brothers must hand over the 3 hitmen who came to eliminate him that day. These men, called Narco Juniors, are close friends of the Arellano brothers, who initially refused to comply. Sources indicate, however, that a compromise may have been reached between the two organizations, but Amado would never benefit from it. Before leaving Mexico, he planned to completely transform his appearance through plastic surgery to facilitate his new life. This meticulous plan collapses on July 4, 1997, when he passes away in a Mexico City clinic following a botched surgical operation. He is 40 years old. According to Chilean authorities, he had intended to change his appearance and return to Chile to pursue his new life away from the cartel he had built. No one expected this powerful man to fall in such a mundane way, neither eliminated by his rivals nor captured by authorities, but as a victim of a medical complication during cosmetic surgery. His body quickly becomes a media phenomenon in Mexico, photographed from every angle, fueling the numerous conspiracy theories surrounding his alleged passing. Despite Mexico's notorious corruption and the possibilities of document falsification, DEA agents confirm the match between Amado's DNA and that of the body found. Yet numerous speculations persist. Some maintain that Amado, the man always 10 steps ahead, orchestrated his own disappearance using a corpse with altered fingerprints. The fact that his relatives never formally identify the body reinforces these doubts. The remains presented as Amado's bear little resemblance to known photos of the Baron. With his colossal financial resources, the technology to graft fingerprints would certainly have been within his reach. Some theories suggest that Amado lives today in the United States under a new identity, having exchanged information with the American government. Mexican authorities also support the theory of an elimination orchestrated by Amado's rivals. In retaliation, many doctors and surgeons involved in the operation are kidnapped, tortured, and then executed. Their dismembered bodies are discovered in metal barrels abandoned on a highway, the signature of a Juarez Cartel vendetta. At the same time, Mexican authorities officially accuse certain members of the medical team of having deliberately caused Amado's death by administering inappropriate medication.
We concluded that the doctors, with the clear intent to kill Carrillo, administered the drug in violation of the most basic medical standards. Investigators later revealed that the doctors gave Carrillo the post-operative sedative Dormicum, a drug they should have known was lethal given his alcohol-related liver condition.
The exact circumstances of what happened in that private clinic in Mexico City remain shrouded in mystery. The liquidation of certain doctors could have been revenge, or simply a way to silence those who knew too much. Numerous theories have circulated, but whatever the truth, Amado's chapter had definitely closed. According to testimony from Vicentillo, Amado allegedly made one last spectacular gesture before his operation. True to his reputation as the Lord of the Skies, he reportedly had a plane prepared, removed all the seats, and sent it to Chile filled with dollars in anticipation of the new life that awaited him. After Amado's fall, the Mexican underworld underwent a profound restructuring. Despite internal turbulence and several tense meetings, the succession was finally settled. Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, nicknamed El Viceroy, took the reins of the Juarez organization with the support of his brother, Rodolfo, and a council composed of several influential lieutenants. This expanded command structure maintained strategic alliances with the leaders of the Sinaloa group, preserving the balance of power. Despite his skills, El Viceroy would never match his brother's aura and influence. Amado possessed a unique talent for orchestrating logistical operations and keeping cohesion among the various players in the network. Major figures like El Mayo, El Azul, and particularly El Barbas Beltran Leyva benefited considerably from his rise, gradually strengthening their own criminal infrastructures. After Amado's fall, no successor had the necessary capabilities to manage such a volume of activities amid the ever-growing U.S. drug demand. Despite the continued collaboration between the two organizations, the direct heirs of the Juarez Cartel were quickly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the logistical task. This situation gave Sinaloa leaders greater negotiating leverage, allowing them to climb the ranks and seize increasingly larger market shares. From his cell, El Chapo watched with satisfaction the growing prosperity of the business. He enjoyed luxurious comfort thanks to the considerable income generated by his brother and distant cousins, notably El Barbas. For him, this incarceration was only temporary. He was determined to regain his freedom no matter the cost. But what happened to Sergio El Grande, our strategic officer at the checkpoint?
How many years did you work for Amado Carrillo and the Juarez organization?
Until I retired. I got out of the Federal Judicial Police.
And when was that?
That was in approximately 1997.
And why did you get out of the Federal Judicial Police?
There was a change in top person of the Federal Judicial Police. A general came into office, General Alvarez, and he started investigating people, those of us who were close to Amado Carrillo. Among them was me.
And what did you do?
Well, I quit.
Did there come a time when you started working for another kingpin?
Yes.
Who was that?
Altiro Beltran.
The experience gained with Amado would prove invaluable for El Grande. This professional background would allow him, a few years later, to join the organization of Arturo Beltran Leyva, nicknamed El Barbas. Over time, he would become a leading figure there. Finally, the Tijuana organization remained to be neutralized. As expected, the Arellano Felix brothers quickly became the priority target of American authorities. After the fall of the Gulf Cartel leader and Amado and Juarez, the Tijuana brothers, highly publicized, logically found themselves next on the list. Barely 2 months after Amado's fall, Ramon Arellano Felix was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list.
A top leader of the Tijuana drug cartel has now been placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. $2 million has been offered for his capture.
The newest face on the Most Wanted list is 33-year-old Ramon Arellano Felix, the enforcer for the Tijuana drug cartel, the executioner.
American pressure intensified, and the Arellanos' time was now numbered. Nevertheless, the Sinaloa men would beat law enforcement to the punch by striking first.